What if the universe was written in code, but we had the key to unlock it? Today we embark on a journey through one of the most influential and enigmatic traditions in world spirituality, the mystical current of Judaism, known as Kabbalah or Kabbalah. Together we will uncover the origin, evolution, and enduring influence of this religious philosophy that has shaped esoteric thought for centuries. From the oral visions of Merkavah or Merkavah mysticism to the symbolic universe of the Zohar, Kabbalah has sought to illuminate the nature of God, creation, and the soul. For centuries it was concealed, passed from master to disciple in a guarded language of symbols. Yet its imagery and cosmology reached far beyond Judaism, leaving a profound mark on alchemy, Renaissance philosophy, Rosicrucianism, and modern spirituality. Before turning to its mystical and philosophical dimensions, we must first ask, what is Kabbalah? Where did it emerge? What frameworks helped to shape its rise? And how did it transition from an ancient visionary system into a practice that still continues to influence esoteric thought? Kabbalah or Kabbalah is a corpus of Jewish mystical and esoteric teachings that seeks to understand the nature of God, the structure of creation, and the dynamics of the human soul through symbolic, allegorical, and metaphysical frameworks. According to its earliest and original usage in ancient Hebrew, Kabbalah means reception or tradition, and in this context it tends to refer to any sacred writing composed after or otherwise outside of the 5 books of the Torah. The roots of Jewish mysticism trace back to the pre-3rd century CE period, specifically to the Merkavah or chariot mystics, whose teachings were largely oral and transmitted within tightly controlled initiatory frameworks. This early form of Jewish mysticism was inspired by the prophet Ezekiel's vision, found in chapter 1 of the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel's vision of the divine chariot depicts a 4-faced, winged celestial vehicle, animated by living creatures, represented by a man, a bull, a lion, and an eagle, containing wheels within wheels, symbolizing God's omnipresence and the dynamic structure of the cosmos. Mystical interpreters, particularly within Merkavah and later Kabbalistic thought, have associated the 4 faces with the fixed signs of the zodiac: Taurus depicted by a bull, Leo by a lion, Scorpio by an eagle, and Aquarius by a man, linking the vision to a cosmic order that governs both the heavens and the soul's ascent. These Merkavah mystics sought direct experiential knowledge of the divine throne and the structure of the heavens, using meditative techniques such as contemplating divine names, ritual breathing, and visualization of the heavenly chambers. The Merkavah mysticism of the Talmudic and post-Talmudic periods was characterized by the practical secrecy of its instructions and by the dangers involved in attempting the ascent into the heavenly realms. The texts of these early mystics, known as the Hekhalot literature, circulated orally from the first centuries of the Common Era. One passage from the Hekhalot literature, specifically from the Hekhalot Rabbati, in English called the Greater Book of Heavenly Palaces, describes the danger of attempting the ascent toward the divine. 4 men entered paradise. Ben Azai looked and died. Ben Zoma looked and was stricken. Aher cut down the shoots. Only Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and departed in peace. This illustrates the intensity of the mystical experience. It was perilous, initiatory, and transformative, laying the groundwork for later Kabbalistic cosmologies. In previous explorations, we learned that Neoplatonists sought the soul's union with the One, while Gnostic and Hermetic traditions pursued gnosis, the direct experiential knowledge of the divine. Merkavah mystics, however, warned that ascending the heavenly realms required strict preparation and spiritual discipline, reflecting a shared early aspiration for transformative communion expressed through different approaches to risk, method, and preparation. So, how did Kabbalah transition from the early practices of the Merkavah mystics beyond the first centuries of the Common Era? It began with a book known as the Sefer Yetzirah. The next great turning point for Kabbalah after Merkavah mysticism came with the composition of the Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Formation. Scholars date it between the 3rd and 6th centuries CE. While traditionally attributed to the patriarch Abraham, modern scholarship views it as an anonymous Jewish work of late antiquity. The Sefer Yetzirah introduces the central idea that the cosmos was created through the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, plus the 10 Sefirot, which are 10 divine attributes or emanations of God in the symbolic system of Kabbalah, representing stages of divine energy that flow from the infinite to the created world, later depicted in the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. In one striking passage, we read of these 32 paths, 22 from the Hebrew letters, plus the 10 Sefirot, with 32 mystical paths of wisdom engraved Yah, the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, the living God, King of the universe, El Shaddai, merciful and gracious, high and exalted, dwelling in eternity. And he created his universe with 3 books, with text, with numbers, and with communication. This passage emphasizes the central Kabbalistic motif of divine speech called Dabar or Davar, the sacred letters of creation, and the symbolic triads that structure the cosmos. These 32 paths, the 10 Sefirot, and the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet form the metaphysical architecture for understanding both the universe and the human soul. Here we see the fusion of language, number, and spirit. The letters themselves are creative forces, and the Sefirot become the first symbolic structure of divine energy. The Sefer Yetzirah is not speculative mysticism, but a cosmological meditation, a map of creation through letters and numbers. Already we can recognize themes that echo across other esoteric practices: the creative power of sound, the mystical significance of number, and the hidden structure of reality as something that can be revealed through symbol. Onward from the Sefer Yetzirah, how did the Kabbalistic system evolve? By the late 12th century, further developments crystallized with the composition of another seminal text called the Bahir, or Book of Illumination, attributed to Rabbi Nehemiah ben Hakana. The Bahir introduced a more developed concept of the Sefirot from the Sefer Yetzirah, the stages of divine energy that flow from the infinite to the created world. The creation of the world in the Bahir can be summarized as follows. What are the 10 utterances? They are the 10 Sefirot, by which the world was created. Just as the soul fills the body, so does God fill the world. This poetic imagery links the Sefirot to the very life force of creation. The Bahir's central concern is to elucidate the hidden structure of divine reality through symbolic correspondences and the numerical value of letters, offering a systematic vision that would become the foundation of Kabbalistic thought. Here we see the emergence of a structured symbolic esotericism that would dominate Jewish mystical discourse for centuries. Visualizations of the Sefirot, such as those showing the vertical tree of life with its emanations, depict how divine energy flows from the ineffable Godhead, called Ein Sof, into the material world. The Bahir transforms abstract numbers into living powers, the dynamic structure of divinity itself. To fully understand medieval Kabbalah, we must visualize the structure that underpins its mystical system, illustrated by this tree of life just mentioned. Each of the 10 Sefirot represents a channel through which divine energy flows into the world, and through which the human soul can ascend. Originating in texts like the Bahir, the Sefirot are as follows: Keter, crown; Chokmah, wisdom, Bina, understanding, Kesed, kindness, Gevurah, severity, Tiferet, beauty, Netzach, eternity, Hod, glory, Yesod, foundation, and Malkut, kingdom. These 10 Sefirot form a map of both the cosmos and the inner spiritual journey. Visualized as interconnected spheres on the tree of life, they illustrate the dynamic relationship between the divine, creation, and human consciousness. These emanations provide a symbolic structure for understanding the hidden operations of God and the soul's ascent. The tree of life is not merely allegorical, but a practical guide for meditation, aligning human consciousness with the flow of divine energy. By grasping the tree of life, we see how the symbolic frameworks of early Kabbalah laid the foundation for future developments. This visualization bridges theory with practice, connecting cosmic structure to the personal spiritual journey. So now we have learned about the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation or formation, and we understand the premise of the Bahir, the book of illumination, and its use of the tree of life and its 10 Sefirot. So next we ask, how did the Kabbalistic tradition evolve past these works? Between 1150 and 1300 CE, Kabbalah bifurcated into two complementary branches. The Theosophical or speculative Kabbalah, engaged in symbolic and intellectual interpretation of sacred texts, while the Ecstatic or experiential Kabbalah focused on meditation, mystical ascent, and personal experience of divine union. Abraham Abulafia, writing in the late 13th century, exemplifies the ecstatic tradition. In his Haye Haolam Haba, translating to life of the world to come, he instructs, "When you join letter to letter, and your soul shall be inflamed, behold, the name will reveal itself to you." Here we see a shift from symbolic contemplation toward direct mystical experience, using letter permutations and divine names to induce states of prophetic insight. Abulafia's practices complement the structural and allegorical approaches of the earlier texts, bridging early Kabbalistic theory with experiential methods that would influence later mystical currents, including meditative aspects of Lurianic Kabbalah, which we will discuss in further detail momentarily. Where the ecstatic stream of Kabbalah, exemplified by Abraham Abulafia, focused on practical techniques such as letter permutations and meditative exercises to induce direct mystical and prophetic experiences. A 13th century text called the Zohar, or Book of Splendor, emerged as the central work of the Theosophical mystical stream, codifying the structure of the Sefirot and offering symbolic exegesis of the Torah, while also incorporating elements influenced by visionary and meditative practices. This text is undoubtedly the crown jewel of medieval Kabbalah. Written in Aramaic and first published around 1290 CE, the Zohar, or the Book of Splendor, was attributed to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, also known by the acronym Rashbi, but most modern scholars identify the true author as Moses de Leon of Castile. The Zohar interprets the Torah as a mystical narrative, using allegories, metaphors, and esoteric stories to convey the dynamic relationship between the human soul and the divine. The text also emphasizes the concept of tikkun, the repair and harmonization of creation. In this text we find God, the divine presence of God called the Shekinah, as well as angels and humanity, all interacting through layers of hidden meaning. The Zohar teaches that each letter of the Torah, each word, carries hidden wisdom, and that meditation upon these texts allows the soul to ascend through the worlds of emanation. The Zohar's approach is not merely theoretical, it is intensely practical, guiding mystical contemplation and ethical behavior as vehicles for spiritual elevation. Visual representations in medieval manuscripts often depict symbolic forms of the Sefirot, angelic hierarchies, and cosmic structures, reinforcing the experiential component of Kabbalah, Contemporary interpretations, such as Daniel Matt's annotated translations of the Zohar, to Elliot Wolfson's explorations of mystical imagination, illuminate the text's enduring relevance. Excerpts like the following help us to understand its longevity. Come and see. The Torah has a body, the garment of Torah. Whoever looks at the garment alone, no more than that. Woe to that person. But the wise look at the soul, the root of all, the true Torah. Here, scripture itself becomes multi-layered, body, garment, and soul, a profound allegory for esoteric interpretation. The Zohar operates as a performative space. By reading and meditating on its texts, the practitioner enacts a journey into the depths of divine reality, reshaping the self and the cosmos. To trace the early arc of Kabbalistic thought, we move from the guarded visions of the Merkavah mystics through the symbolic meditations of the Sefer Yetzirah and the Bahir, toward the vast mythic and poetic universe of the Zohar. What began as an esoteric practice and cryptic speculation became a comprehensive symbolic system for interpreting both the cosmos and the divine. The Zohar did not simply comment on scripture, it recast the biblical text as a cosmic drama, a mythic mirror of the soul's return to God. By uniting intellectual speculation with ecstatic aspiration, Kabbalah established itself as a tradition capable of addressing both scholars engaged in metaphysical inquiry and seekers yearning for direct mystical encounter. Next, we will explore the development of Kabbalah into the 16th century, as well as how the esoteric currents of Kabbalah extended beyond Jewish contexts, influencing alchemy, Christian mysticism, and ultimately Rosicrucian philosophy. By the 16th century, Kabbalah underwent another dramatic transformation under Isaac Luria in Safed, Palestine. His doctrines became known as Lurianic Kabbalah, which emphasized concepts such as Simsum, or divine contraction, Shevirot Hakalim, or shattering of the vessels, and Tikkun Olam, or cosmic repair. Lurianic Kabbalah reimagined creation as a dynamic drama of exile and restoration. Luria's system transformed Kabbalah from a contemplative mysticism into a living dynamic cosmology in which human action could influence divine reality. In the Etz Haim, a text summarizing Luria's teachings by his student, Haim Vital, we read the following. In the beginning, the Infinite withdrew his light, leaving a void. Into this void he sent forth his rays, which broke the vessels, and sparks of holiness fell into the depths. This myth provided a profound metaphysical explanation for evil, suffering, and humanity's role in restoring divine harmony. Parallel movements, such as Sabbeteanism, which arose in the 17th century around the figure of Sabbetai Zevi, demonstrated the intense eschatological and messianic potential inherent in Kabbalistic thought. Although these movements were controversial, they highlight the persistent influence of Kabbalistic symbolism on Jewish spirituality. Luria was controversial for transforming Jewish cosmology with daring mythic imagery, though his system became canonized in later mysticism. Zevi was controversial for embodying and distorting those very currents into an explosive messianic movement that ended in apostasy and disillusionment. In the 18th century, we find a movement called Hasidism under the leadership of the Baal Shem Tov, who is also known by the acronym BEST. This movement offered a democratized mystical path. Meditation, prayer, and devotional practice became accessible to the common believer, reflecting the Kabbalistic principle that every soul could engage in spiritual ascent. Hasidism brought the deep symbols of Kabbalah into lived ecstatic practice, emphasizing joy, devotion, and the immanence of the divine in all aspects of life. Centuries before Hasidism emerged in the 18th century, Kabbalah had already begun to influence Western thought. During the Renaissance, Christian scholars sought to reconcile humanist philosophy with mystical insight, turning to Kabbalistic frameworks as a source of symbolic wisdom. Figures such as Giovanni Pico della and Johannes Reuchlin drew upon Jewish mystical texts to construct systems connecting the human soul, divine knowledge, and mystical ascent. Pico della Mirandola, in his work titled Heptaplus, meaning Discourse on the 7 Days of Creation, from 1486, explains, "The Kabbalah of the Hebrews reveals the nature of the divine in ways that complement the truths of philosophy, and through this, man may ascend toward the knowledge of God." Johannes Reuchlin adds, "In the Hebrew letters, in their form, their order, their value, lies hidden the whole of divine wisdom." This Christian Kabbalah of the Renaissance paved the way for later Western esoteric traditions, including the 17th century Rosicrucian manifestos, and ultimately forms part of the broader historical backdrop against which Hasidism and other Kabbalistic movements later developed. The Renaissance witnessed a remarkable cultural exchange. This philosophical adoption of Kabbalah was paralleled by the integration of alchemical ideas. Alchemy, like Kabbalah, was a language of transformation. The purifying and perfecting of matter symbolized the refinement of the soul. Alchemy and Kabbalah intertwined deeply in Renaissance symbolism. Just as alchemy described the transmutation of lead into gold, Kabbalah described the tikkun, the repair of divine sparks. Both practices saw spiritual transformation mirrored in cosmic symbolism. The union of Kabbalah and alchemy in the Renaissance was not mere coincidence. The alchemical operations of transformation mirrored the mystical operations of the soul, a correspondence that Christian Kabbalists eagerly exploited. Scholars such as Robert Flood and Michael Meyer later drew upon both alchemy and Kabbalah to develop complex allegorical systems that described spiritual ascent, moral purification, and cosmic harmony. This interplay laid the groundwork for later esoteric movements, including Rosicrucianism, which would explicitly combine Kabbalistic symbolism, alchemical metaphor, and Christian mystical ideals. This period marked the beginning of Kabbalah's integration into a pan-European esoteric culture. In recent decades, celebrities such as Madonna, Ashton Kutcher, Demi Moore, Britney Spears, and others have publicly embraced Kabbalah through the Kabbalah Center in Los Angeles. Most scholars, however, view the center as a simplified adaptation that is highly commercialized and departs significantly from traditional Kabbalistic study and practice. Kabbalah remains a living current of esoteric wisdom, offering profound spiritual insight and intellectual inspiration, captivating seekers, artists, and scholars across the world. In our next video, we will examine Rosicrucianism, the early modern esoteric movement that drew upon Kabbalah, alchemy, and Hermetic philosophy. Just as Kabbalah mapped the flow of divine energy through the Sefirot and charted the soul's ascent, Rosicrucianism adapted these mystical principles into a Christian framework, blending allegorical teaching, alchemical symbolism, and initiatory practice to guide spiritual growth and societal renewal. Though separated by centuries and religious context, both systems share a common aim: to reveal hidden truth and facilitate the transformation of the individual through disciplined study, meditation, and symbolic insight. Join us next time as we examine the enigmatic manifestos of the Rosicrucians in the 17th century that ignited a firestorm of speculation among alchemists, philosophers, and theologians across Europe. Where will this journey take us after Rosicrucianism? Like and subscribe to find out. Thank you for watching. Find more at joinseek.org.